Okay, so again, this is our technical assistance session and virtual bidders conference for the Adult Redeploy Illinois Notice of Funding Opportunity for Implementation Grants in State Fiscal Year 24. This meeting is being recorded and this session will be posted on the website so that others can have access to the information as well. So as we go through this session, we'll probably be using a number of acronyms, and I just would like to do some level setting here at the beginning. AF, if you see it, that can be used for a lot of different things by the kids these days, but here we'll use it as Amplifund. ARI is Adult Redeploy Illinois. CRA is the Crime Reduction Act, which is our enabling legislation. GATA is the Grants Accountability and Transparency Act, and this is the legislation, the state legislation that governs the way state dollars are granted out to different organizations. GMS is the grants management system that may be used, but that is used the same. That means Amplifund, and Amplifund means GMS. CJA is the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority. That is where Adult Redeploy Illinois is housed. It's the state agency that administers ARI and is dedicated to improving the administration of justice in the state through grant making and research. NOFO is Notice of Funding Opportunity. So the agenda for today's session is we'll talk a little bit about Adult Redeploy Illinois. We'll talk about the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Then we will go through screen by screen in the Amplifund process for the ARI application. We'll talk a little bit about the review process, provide some resources, and have time for questions and answers. So about Adult Redeploy Illinois. Adult Redeploy Illinois is a state grant program that was created by the Crime Reduction Act of 2009. And the goal of it was to increase local alternatives to incarceration by making grants to jurisdictions, counties, and judicial circuits. As I said, we're administered by the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority, and we're modeled after the successful Juvenile Redeploy Illinois program. Our mission is to safely reduce prison use by building local systems that divert individuals from a prison sentence into more cost-effective programs that promote their reintegration into the community. We provide funding and technical assistance to Illinois communities to establish a continuum of sanctions and treatment alternatives that effectively address social determinants of crime and incarceration and promote equity within the justice system. So we are a mission-based program, and the goal of our funding is to fund this approach we're talking about, which is to reduce local reliance on prison for people with probation eligible charges and to really build out local capacity to supervise and serve them in their communities. Our goals are to invest in results-oriented local programs that rehabilitate individuals in their community as an alternative to incarceration and to prevent relapse and future criminal behavior. Our other goal is to foster a strong, equitable community corrections system, through access to interventions that target individual needs and leverage assets of individuals. We want to support community-led justice efforts that are consistent with our values and that cost less than incarceration. And we want to generate and collect evidence in support of decarceration efforts. Currently, our network is comprised of 28 sites or grantees that cover 44 counties and that operate over 50 prison diversion programs across the state. Every one of them is a different program, a different approach that reflects the local needs and conditions. And we consider each one of our sites a laboratory. We've been working with many of the sites from the beginning of the program over about 12 years, and we have seen them evolve and um, work with different types of evidence-informed practices, try different ones out, see what will work with their population to reduce recidivism. So about the notice of funding opportunity. So this is for state fiscal year 24, which starts July 1st of 2023 and goes through June 30th, 2024. It is for implementation grants. We also sometimes provide funding for planning processes, planning grants, but this notice of funding opportunity is for implementation of actual programming that will reduce people going into the Department of Corrections. And this is the beginning of a new 3-year cycle. So the way current state funding works is that there is a competitive process at the beginning of a 3-year cycle, open to everybody around the state, that the eligible applicants. Then we go through, we determine the awards for that, and then those awards can be renewed for 2 more years on the basis of this notice of funding opportunity. And then we start the process over again in 3 years. But this 3-year process, and this year in particular, offers new sites to come into our network, and so that we can expand our program and expand the reach of our dollars, but also that our current sites gives them an opportunity to kind of reset, refresh what it is that they're doing, and potentially go in some new directions. So the purpose specifically of this notice of funding opportunity is to provide funds to local jurisdictions to implement programs with the overall goal of reducing the number of people committed to prison on probation eligible charges. So ARI funds can be used to create or enhance local programs, assess individuals' risk, needs, and strengths, and offer a continuum of evidence-based sanctions and treatment alternatives focused on rehabilitation and accountability over punishment. The results expected from ARI and this notice of funding opportunity include reduced prison admissions, a lower cost to taxpayers, and an end to the destructive cycle of crime and incarceration. So the eligibility for these funds are county units of government. This comes from our legislation. So county units of government are the only eligible applicant, but they can also come together as a group of counties or as a judicial circuit. But the funds will be provided to the implementing agency, which is going to be a county unit of government or judicial circuit. And then other units of local government or private agencies or not-for-profit organizations are not eligible to apply themselves, but these organizations may provide personnel or services through subawards or subcontracts with the applicant county or judicial circuit. The funds available in this notice of funding opportunity are $11 million. We've received strong support from the governor and General Assembly, and we expect to have $11 million, which is an increase over prior notices of funding opportunity to implement this program in our current sites and in new sites. The grants range from $50,000 for each applicant to $1 million. The estimated number of grants that will be awarded are 25 to 30. and the award period is July 1st, 2023 through June 30th, 2024. So the timeline for this particular notice of funding opportunity is that this notice of funding opportunity was officially posted on March 28th. Today is our technical assistance session that's available for answering questions, but we also have a very robust process of taking questions, which we'll talk about later, on an ongoing basis via an email address. We answer those and then we post both the questions and the answers on the website and in Amplifund so that everybody can benefit from the information that's shared. Those questions are due by April 20th, 2023. The application due date is 5 p.m. on April 27th, 2023. The Oversight Board, which we are governed by an oversight board that is statutorily defined and includes stakeholders from across the criminal justice system, across the state, and non-governmental organizations, will review and approve awards in June 2023. The program period, as mentioned, will be July 1st, 2023 through June 30th, 2024. So again, implementation is the name of the game. That's what we're trying to accomplish with this notice of funding opportunity. And we're looking at implementing prison diversion program or programs. So we have a number of sites that not only that fund more than one program that work in a complementary fashion to reduce reliance on the prison system. In order to apply for the funds, you have to have a local plan. Well, the local plan is actually the completed program narrative with a logic model and letters of support, all of which are part of the Amplifund application process. And this is your mini strategic plan to implement a prison diversion program or programs in your jurisdiction. Now, examples of the types of programs that are funded with ARI funds are problem-solving courts, so adult drug courts, mental health courts, or veterans courts, or a combination of all of them. Intensive supervision probation programs that have services attached to them. So specialized caseloads, perhaps for people with mental illness. And then other enhancements across the continuum of options. So perhaps we have one site actually that utilizes ARI funds to provide recovery coaching for all of the problem-solving court individuals, as well as some individuals that are in probation, so on a needs basis. But it's an enhancement to their overall work so that fewer people will find themselves in a situation of not meeting the conditions of their probation or their problem-solving court, and perhaps looking at revocation to prison. Sometimes there's a little lag with my PowerPoint, so if you can just bear with me. Okay, so the program design, the funds from the solicitation, again, will support the development and implementation of local plans. Successful applicants will explain how addressing the risk, needs, and strengths of a defined target population through effective target interventions will lead to a greater public safety and reduced reliance on prison. The program requirements for anybody who wants to be part of our network and request funding through this NOFO are to meet the goal of implementing their local plan, to establish or expand a prison diversion programs, and then to partner with us in our mission for racial equity. This is something that we have made a specific and very central part of our funding, of our whole funding program and technical assistance program, and it relates to making sure that there is equitable access to these programs that we know will benefit people and keep them out of prison. Another requirement, and this will not be a surprise for, or not a surprise, but also will not be anything new for the probation departments in the state, many of whom we work with in our program, is that there must be an assessment of client risk, needs, and strengths at the beginning of the program so that the interventions that are funded are directed to where the needs and risk are and that leverage the strengths. And in Illinois, that assessment instrument that is often used is called the adult risk assessment. Other assessment, like clinical assessments, are also something that we encourage and will fund. Then evidence-based or evidence-informed practices must be a part of what it is that you're doing. So whatever we fund has to have some evidence behind it that it will help and that it won't hurt. Performance measurement is baked into our program, and that is because we really believe that diverting people to alternatives in the community, keeping them in their community with their families, and keep them integrated in the spaces where they live is a better way of doing things than sending them to prison. But just with every time that you want to provide an alternative, you need to have evidence that your alternative is meeting its needs and is a better use of resources. So performance measurement is a big part of what we do. Another thing, we have an accountability mechanism that is built into our program, and we ask all of our sites in exchange for the funding that they receive from us to commit to reducing the number of people they sent to the Department of Corrections. And we will go over this, how that reduction goal is calculated site by site, but it's something that goes into the award contract, and it becomes the primary performance that we measure. And then if there is the ability in our legislation that this goal is not met, that some of the funds may need to be paid back to us. And that was just something that the legislators at the time that we were created wanted to have an accountability mechanism to make sure that they had the right partners on board. If you are going to be utilizing our funds for a problem-solving court, we need to see evidence that this has been certified through the Administrative Office of the Illinois Courts, showing that it is evidence-informed and being operated to the standards that have been established for the state. But we can also have indication of that this is in process if you are developing a new problem-solving court. You can still request funds, and the funds can be used to get you up and running. But until you have certification, you won't be able to enroll clients. And then evaluation, as I mentioned with the performance measurement, evaluation is a key component. And that's the feedback loop that we have, that the funds are being used as intended and they're getting the outcomes that we all are hoping for. So I mentioned the local plan. This is a term that is part of the legislation that created Adult Redeploy Illinois. It says that each county or circuit participating in the Adult Redeploy Illinois program shall create a local plan describing how it will protect public safety and reduce the county or circuit's utilization of incarceration in state facilities or local county jails by the creation or expansion of individualized services or programs. So that is just absolutely something that we need from every site, is a local plan, or everybody that wants to be a part of Adult Redeploy Illinois. And as I mentioned, the the local plan is equal to or the same as the completed program narrative in this notice of funding opportunity. As I mentioned, it's like a mini strategic plan. The idea is that you will have thought of have the opportunity to think about everything that's going to make a successful program for the community and for the clients that are in the program. So we ask you to think through a lot of different steps. Have the summary of the program, describe your service area, what are some of the problems that you see in terms of the criminal legal system, what are some of the gaps, what are some of the demographics in the jurisdiction, what is kind of creating the environment for this program. Then a statement of the problem. So what's the current situation? What are the people who are currently being sent from your county or judicial circuit to the Department of Correction who could have been diverted to probation? What do we know about them? And then statement of the problem, what's the unmet need? What are the gaps in whether it's the probation system or whether it's the health and human service system that need to be met in order to effectively work with the people that had been being sent to the Department of Corrections who can now be kept locally and served locally? Who are your key partners around the table? We know that we know from our experience that to have a successful program, you need to have a multidisciplinary team. You need to have all members and sides of the criminal legal system. You need to have the judge involved. You need to have um, the prosecutor and the public defender on board. You need to have clinicians if you're providing clinical support. Probation is oftentimes the key player that runs through the whole process and keeps it moving along. So we like to have a list of those key partners. Project implementation. So this kind of the guts of the local plan. So knowing what the problem is, knowing who's around the table, what is it that you intend to do? Describe your program model or models. Who is your target population? What is your target intervention or interventions? What is your intake and assessment process? How do you ensure equitable access to your program? How is the system going to be impacted by this particular program? What is the logic model? What do you need to put in? What do you expect to get out? And then what are your ultimate outcomes based on all these investments that you put into the program? And then your implementation schedule. What do you need to do? By when do you need to do it? And who's responsible? Then there's a very healthy goals, objectives, and performance metrics section that's part of the local plan. And this is what the performance measurement aspect of the program is based on. And one big part of Adult Redeploy Illinois is that it must be a cost-effective alternative to incarceration. Right now, we know that a year the cost of a year in prison for each individual is around $45,000. So we would expect to see with an Adult Redeploy Illinois program that there would be a more cost-effective solution in the community to work with an individual. And in the history of our program, the average cost of an ARI intervention for a year is 1/10 of that, or $4,500. But it can range up to $10,000, $15,000 per person, still cost effective compared to prison. And then, of course, the big thing is, how will these funds be used? Is it a reasonable, um, are they reasonable and necessary expenses? And this is in the budget detail and budget narrative part of the local plan and the application. So there are two main parts that I just again want to stress of a local plan: the who and the what, the target population, the target interventions. Just want to talk a little bit more about these. The target population. So the two kind of parameters that we see in our legislation as far as who's to be served by an adult redeploy Illinois program is they must have a probation eligible charge. So it can't be a charge that they're facing that requires them to go to prison. Because if there's a mandatory prison sentence per law, um, that is the law. So if it has to be a probation eligible charge, and the person has to be facing prison or be on their way to prison. So these are, for the most part, what we are doing in Adult Redeploy Illinois is funding very intensive interventions that keep people out of prison, keep them out of the front door of prison. And so intensive services need to go to intensive risk and need. Now, each jurisdiction can focus on what we will talk about next is the total eligible population. That's defined by a baseline with data that we provide, or a subset of that population. And we want, no matter what the target population as it's defined, we know that jurisdictions best understand what their local needs are. They're best situated to identify what the target population should be in their programs, but the selected target population should result in the greatest possible number of individuals diverted from state prisons while preserving public safety. So as I mentioned, Adult Redeploy Illinois provides data that will produce this baseline, target population baseline. So at the Adult Redeploy Illinois website, under the Grants tab, you will find eligibility tables. These were created by CJR researchers looking at data that came from the Department of Corrections over the previous 3 years. By each county, it shows who was sent on a probation eligible charge from a county and what was their offense. Not each individual, but in the aggregate, what are the offenses that went by class, by type, and with the demographics. And the goal is that these tables will help any ARI applicant kind of zero in on who has been going from your county to prison on a probation eligible charge. And once you know the who, then you can determine the what will make the difference to divert them to community-based interventions. So here's an example of a table. Please don't pay attention. This is an older table with state fiscal year 18 through 20, but this is what it will look like for state fiscal year 20 through 22. And you have the judicial circuit. You can actually sort with this arrow here by county or by judicial circuit. You find the county, and then you find the number of people that have been sent on average to the Department of Corrections on probation eligible charges over the past 3 years. So if we look here, for example, at Boone County, a nice round number here, they have been sending 80 individuals on average every year with probation eligible charges to the Department of Corrections. Then looking a little further, there are other tables that show which of those 80 were class 4, which ones were DUI, which one were property, which ones were controlled substances, which ones were 3, and so on. And then there are also separate tables that have demographics. So for example, if you want to focus, let me go back for a minute. If you think that if you notice that there are a number of people from your county that are going in on low level class 3 and 4 controlled substance charges, that may suggest that you need or could develop a program, a diversion program that focused on people with substance use disorders. If it's property, that would take a little bit more unpacking. Perhaps there are, um, different things that you can learn about the property crimes, whether they may be motivated by substance use disorders. They may be motivated by something else. Um, Person offenses, those are now eligible too. Um, and uh, and it some sites want to, on the basis of their local conditions, they want to leave out DUIs. It's just like their stakeholders do not want those as part of a diversion program or want to deal with those in a different way. Some sites will just look at the number of DUIs and take that number out of their target population when they're calculating it. Now, another thing though that you might notice when you're looking at the demographics is if you have, for example, an emerging adults or transition age youth or opportunity youth, different ways that they're described, and that may be where you find a large number of individuals that seem to be going from your county to the Department of Corrections. That may suggest that the program that you want to create or expand would specifically work with this population. So I'll give you an example how these numbers can be used. Let's again s- ex- um, use as an example Boone County. The total eligible that they had in their 3-year baseline was 80. But let's say that this county wanted to focus only on class 3s and 4s. They just know that their stakeholders, their prosecutor, or their judges just feel like the 3s and 4s are where they want to kind of focus their efforts and work on diverting low level offenders. So this would, or people, low level offenses. So these individuals would be, that would mean that your target population was 60 and your 25% reduction goal, which would have been 20 here. And again, this goes into your grant agreement, it would be 15. We've had some sites that even further reduced their target population to focus only on the low levels that have substance use disorders. For example, estimating that as 2/3 of those in class 3s and 4s. Then they would put in their grant agreement 40 as their target population and their reduction goal would be 10. Now, the way that you meet that each site is intended to meet this goal is related to who comes in the front door of your program, who's enrolled in your program versus sent to the Department of Corrections. So in the course of the grant period, when this site would expect to enroll 20 people into their program instead of sending them to prison in order to meet this reduction goal. As I mentioned, so that's a target population. The target interventions could be what we've seen among our sites is um, anything that's aligned with the goals of ARI and based in or informed by evidence that it's effective in reducing recidivism. And we have seen problem solving courts, which must be AOIC certified or in the process of being certified. We've seen sites suggest an intensive supervision probation with services program or specialized probation caseload, and then making different system enhancement. We really encourage innovation and experimentation with our funds to find out what will really work to reduce recidivism. Regardless of program model that is proposed, all of them must follow the 8 principles of effective interventions. Must have involve an assessment of risk, needs, and strengths of the individual. Enhance intrinsic motivation. So this is use motivational interviewing and other techniques like that. Target interventions using the risk, need, responsivity principles. So an intervention will go, a high intensity intervention will go to a high risk. A moderate risk individual will need moderate intervention. The need is, if that person has a substance use disorder need, that should definitely be part of their individualized treatment while they're in the program. But if they don't have a substance use disorder, then they should not be receiving a cookie cutter substance use disorder treatment plan. And then responsivity has to do with making sure that it's tailored to the specific individuals, so that there is that individualized component that will make their treatment meaningful and successful for the individual. Then skill train with directed practice. This is using like cognitive behavioral therapy. Increasing positive reinforcement. That's we ask our sites to utilize the 4 positive reinforcements to 1 negative reinforcement best practice. Engage ongoing support. So involve your community and involve a multidisciplinary team in the program. Measure your relevant processes and practices and provide measurement feedback. So as I mentioned before with the target population, so if a site is awarded, they must agree to reduce by 25% the number of people sent from that target population, or else face a penalty. Progress towards this reduction goal is measured by number of diversions or enrollments in lieu of incarceration. If a site is at risk of not meeting their reduction goal, we will provide corrective action plan and technical assistance to help address the program to better meet that goal. And if there is a point where a penalty is reviewed, that is at the discretion of the Adult Redeploy Illinois Oversight Board. So performance measurement and evaluation, again, very important to Adult Redeploy Illinois. Each site must submit quarterly progress reports and also submit electronic data files according to some mandatory data elements. And we do have, as part of the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority, we have researchers that support us and support our sites in getting these data in. Sometimes we have the opportunity to participate in external evaluations, and we want our sites to be willing and able to do that. Okay, I'm going to pause here and see if there are any questions that are related to either Adult Redeploy Illinois and our mission, or the purpose of this implementation notice of funding opportunity. Caitlin or Stacy, do you see any questions in the chat?
No, nothing in the chat. Just earlier, there was a question about whether or not we were able to send the slides, and Stacy said they would be posted by close of business tomorrow. Oh, it looks like Erica has a question. Erica, did you want to come off mute?
Yeah, I can. So I do have a question. And I think that you kind of covered the answer, but I wanted to be sure before I stay on any longer. So I am an employee through the police department here in an entire county. So I'm in the city. But I work very closely with the county and have been trying to build a post-diversion mental health program and court system with the county. So since I'm the only one close in terms of grant writing, is it okay for me to, with them agreeing on it because they want me to do this, is it okay for me to apply for this grant with them in mind being the ones that would receive it, the Stevenson County Sheriff's Office or the court system?
Yes, that's a good question. And they would have to be the ones that submit, actually submit. I mean, you could pull it together on their behalf.
Okay.
So like, you could actually put all, as we'll go through Amplifund, you would actually put in all the information, or at least assemble it all, and then they would put it in and submit it.
Okay.
But you are correct. At the end of the day, it would be the county as the implementing agency that would receive it.
Okay. Sounds
Stacy, I don't know if you have anything else that you would say to describe that.
No, Marianne, I think you covered it well. So the county, or the circuit, should be listed as the, applicant or the implementing agency.
okay.
Yes. And we do have another question asking for the link to the, tables with the IDOC data. And that is on the ARI website, and I'll drop that in the chat momentarily.
Thank you, Stacy. And I got to tell you, those eligibility tables are really useful information just on a day-to-day basis. They are information that comes from the Department of Corrections about who's coming in, sent by which counties, and just generally what that population looks like. So there is quite a bit of information in there that can be useful, not only for the process of pulling together the target population description and calculations here for our purposes, but potentially for other uses by the county or by the jurisdiction to kind of paint the picture of the need. I think I saw another question come in. Caitlin, Stacy?
There's a question that asks, historically, how many counties have had to repay funding for failing to achieve objectives?
That's a very good question. And the answer is, in 12 years, 0. None of them have. We have had a couple of sites that have gone into a correction active plan process, which has been just a lot of coaching, technical assistance, and just looking at data to better understand, what might be affecting enrollments. We've also had sites that we have worked with kind of from year to year within our 3-year funding process, where they have noticed their target population changing and their ability to bring in enrollments as they had been bringing them in changing. And so they actually modified the way they used their funding from focused on a problem solving court to they reallocated some funds. They kept some funds in their problem solving courts, but then reallocated some to a probation caseload because they just found that the target population was changing a little bit, that they wouldn't be able to meet the same goals on enrollments in problem solving courts, but they could continue to divert people from the Department of Corrections if they had more tools at their disposal. So they not only had a problem solving court available, but they also utilized our funds to provide services to specialized probation caseloads. So, we can be flexible with that, and we really try to partner with our sites so that they are meeting the goal, because the goal is that fewer people are going into the Department of Corrections on probation eligible charges, and that if there's any chance to keep them in the local jurisdiction and serve them with local services, then we will do that. I saw one more question.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, sorry, Caitlin. From Tony Randall. So the question is, do we know if there will be planning funds for FY24?
That is our goal. Our goal, in the past, we've had both planning and implementation funds in the same notice of funding opportunity. But this year, because we're coming onto the Amplifund grant management system for the first time, best practice with that was that you have a separate notice of funding opportunity for each type of funding. And so we decoupled those, and we plan to have the planning roll out sometime around July. Okay, I'm going to move on. Very grateful for all these questions. And I hope that you see that we are really oriented to provide you the information that you need so that we can all meet this overall goal. So Amplifund is this new way. This is the first time that Adult Redeploy Illinois will be putting out our funding on this platform. So we are trying to be as forthcoming with technical assistance and information as we can, but just know that this is the first time that we've been doing it too. So there are some questions that we may have to go and get answers elsewhere because we haven't been through this process before. But one thing I will tell you, as I've been preparing for this technical assistance session, and Stacy and I have been working very hard at preparing for this and learning Amplifund. It really is a step-by-step process. For the sites that we've been working with, this will look different, but you will see that the questions that we ask are the same questions that we've always asked. They just look a little different. And it's just very important that we take this one step at a time, and we'll get through it. Okay, so to that end, I have tried to take screenshots of pretty much everything that you will encounter as you go through Amplifund, so that you will see just how this is a step-by-step process. So prior to this process and going into the notice of funding opportunity, there are some pre-qualification steps. These are noted in the notice of funding opportunity. So when you access anything about our notice of funding opportunity, whether it's on the CEJA website or on the ARI website or in Amplifund itself, you will find a link to the NOFO packet, and that is going to be a PDF over and above the Amplifund system, which are instructions to kind of walk you through what information it is that you need to have pulled together before you go into Amplifund. And these steps are in that NOFO packet. They are also part of this PowerPoint with active links. But you will need to register with the System for Award Management. You'll need to obtain your unique entity ID. Also have your employer identification number, need to be registered in the Illinois Grantee GATA portal, and obtain a single sign-on for application submission in Amplifund. So all these steps, again, just take them one at a time, and they will flow from one another. And then, of course, any applicants need to be in good standing with all the GATA pre-qualification requirements and also be in good standing with the state of Illinois. So again, with Amplifund, the first step is to go to, as I mentioned, the GATA grantee portal. It's grants.illinois.gov. And in there, you will find how to register for Amplifund. Now, one thing that's important to note is that when you're registering an Amplifund, permission needs to be given, or access needs to be given to the individuals who are going to be preparing the application. So Erica, this kind of goes to, I think, to your question. So you need to make sure that that person is given access to the Amplifund account. I just wanted to note early on, if you have any, I'm not going through all of these steps, but if you want to really take your time learning a little bit more about Amplifund, the CEJA website under funding opportunities and technical assistance has a whole section all about Amplifund with videos, instructional videos, and various types of information. So this is somewhere that you can go and fully get familiar with Amplifund. But this is what the Amplifund registration page looks like from the grantee portal, and has frequently asked questions, as well as buttons for sign in to the grantee portal, Amplifund, creating your account. One thing, and I put this slide several times in this next part. Remember to save often. The Amplifund system times out after 20 minutes of inactivity. Now, if you're in it at all, that's not inactivity, but it's not something that you can work on Amplifund and walk away from it and then come back and expect to see it still up on your screen. Because after 20 minutes, it closes the screen out. And unless you have saved it, your work will not still be in there. So just try to get in the habit. There's always a save and continue, or there's save buttons all over the screen. Just the minute that you put something in, or any work, just save it. It's just a good habit to have, because you don't want to lose any of your work. So most of you know the application link. It's all over the documentation. It's on the CEJA website. It's on the ARI website. Well, once you click onto this link, you'll see this page, which has Adult Redeploy Illinois implementation. So then you're at the kind of the jump page, or the opening page of our solicitation. And there will be an apply button on the top right-hand side, and that's what you would click. And it will open up this illinois.gov authentication portal. And this is where you will have a public account that's part of your registration process. And so you will click onto that and put in the information that you will have gotten through the registration process. Then the next page is the opportunity details. So these are this screen, and you can see the buttons here at the top. You'll see these throughout the screenshots that I have. The opportunity details is just, again, information as it relates, information as it relates to what our mission is, what the agency is, our contact information, and what the purpose is. The next toggle is evaluation and scoring. Personally, I like the fact that this is right up front and not just at the end, because this is what you'll want to know to organize your work related to what it is that is what we're asking for, how many points are awarded to it. So you know where there are higher points, you might want to put a little bit more effort, but you can kind of see also here what it is we're looking for. So when you're answering the question, you can make sure that you're answering it in the way that we're looking for. So this is just the scoring criteria. It's on that first page, but I wanted to put it here too. The total possible points are 100. I recognize this is kind of hard to read, but it's just everything in one place. And you'll see this in the NOVO instructions. You'll see this in Amplifund, but it just reminds you what it is we're looking for at each section. And the way the 100 points are scheduled is with the summary, the description are 5 points each. The statement of problem, the two of those together are 15 points. Key partners, 10 points. Project implementation, that's the real guts of your application, that's worth 30 points. We ask for a logic model to be attached for 5 points. Your implementation schedule or performance plan, 5 points. Your goals and performance metrics are worth 10, and then the budget and budget narrative is 15. I saw some questions came in. Should we go ahead and take those?
Yes, Marianne. So we have one question from Kathy Starkovich, or actually two questions from Kathy. The first one is, can multiple people work in the document simultaneously?
And the answer to that is yes. It's difficult to be in the exact same page at the same time, but for example, when we go to the application forms, of which there are actual 13 forms, it's just breaking down everything in just very manageable chunks. But like you could have like 13 different people working in those at the same time. Just be sure to save often. And the second question?
The second question is, are you able to toggle back and forth between various pages, or is it like the quarterly report where you cannot move ahead until you complete the prior sections?
You can move in between the sections, but at the very end, before you submit it, everything not only has to be saved, but marked as complete. And we'll talk a little bit as we go through all of these next sections. So after the opportunity details and after you've become familiar with how this will be scored, we start going into where you'll be filling out some additional information. The project information, this is just overall, who's the applicant and how much are you requesting and what your contact information is. Now, I put this a couple of times against just a checklist, but this is as we're getting ready to go into the actual application itself. So once you put the project information in, you have your contact information in, now you're moving into what the application in Amplifund is. Again, these must be completed in Amplifund. They are due by 5 p.m. on April 27th. And you can use this as a checklist if you are like me, want to make sure that everything's in there. But these are the sections that we'll go through. There's the Uniform State Grant application. This isn't to be completed in Amplifund. There's a program narrative section, which again is equal to the local plan. And that is to be completed in questions and narrative answers in Amplifund. But as well, you will be downloading and completing and uploading these elements, a commitment table, the IDOC commitment table, which has the data that we looked at, the eligibility data for specific jurisdiction. You'll have a listing of all your key partners, and we have a form that you will download, fill out, and upload. We ask for letters of support from the chief judge or presiding criminal court judge, the state's attorney, public defender, and then the director of probation and court services. Those should be scanned and uploaded as one file in Amplifund. Logic model is something that, again, you can download our template or you can use your own template. And then you will complete and upload that in Amplifund. And then there's a performance metrics table. Again, that is to be downloaded, filled out, and then uploaded. The budget and budget narrative are completed in Amplifund, as well as the performance or implementation plan to be completed in Amplifund. So as I mentioned, there are 13 application forms in this next toggle section. That seems like a lot, but again, these are all the elements that we've been talking about that are part of the local plan, just in manageable chunks. The first, before we go into that, all the forms for the program narrative will be completed in Amplifund. Please answer all the questions. You can refer to the program requirements, which we will go through. We'll talk about the program requirements overall, but then there are also prompts in Amplifund right before each question that will help you to answer them. Also, I would suggest that you have the evaluation and scoring criteria on hand so that you can also refer to that. The program narrative should convey the need for the program, the current efforts, and an understanding and implementation of the required program components. So one thing that we like to bring up is that we want, as you are going through the program narrative and completing the answers to the questions, we do expect applicants to use person-centered or person-first language. You should refer to people as individuals, clients, or participants, and avoid use of offenders, felons, or anything like that that stigmatizes people. We want us all to be on the same page in our mission that we are serving people, and that this is part of our rehabilitation and reintegration goals. Words matter. Okay, so the first of the 13 forms is program information. And this actually, we ask for you to, read through and, I'm sorry, jumped ahead there. We want you to read through and acknowledge that you have read through the materials. Just acknowledge this and mark as complete. The second form is the uniform grant application. If anybody has applied for state funding, you're familiar with these questions. These are very standard to get to know you questions. So fill out those sections and mark as complete. If you plan to request funding for a problem-solving court, we ask you right here in these questions. They may be a little hard to read here. They are not hard to read in Amplifund. But is your program a problem-solving court? Yes or no. Is it certified? Yes, the certification has been received, or it's in progress, or it's been denied. And then the date that the certification was received, if you do have a certification, and then we ask you to upload a copy of your certification letter. The fourth form is the summary of the program, and this is what we use as kind of like a standalone piece. If we're just trying to describe to stakeholders or to our board what it is that you intend to do with the funds, we want to have this in like 2-3 paragraphs. Everything in Amplifund is character limited, but you have plenty of characters. But if you're just thinking about it in terms of the old-fashioned way, what we would like to see here is basically, 2-3 paragraphs that definitely say briefly, what is the target population you're focusing on? What is the program model and the interventions the target interventions that you intend to employ, just generally who are the key partners and community stakeholders, and then what is the total budget and amount that you're requesting from ARI. And the costs, and then the cost per person served. So I mentioned cost effectiveness is a big part of what we say. So what's your total budget? What's the number of people that you expect to serve with this? What's the cost per person served? And try to get those within like 2 paragraphs, and then mark as complete. The 5th form is description of service area. So here is where we ask you to take some time to, again, to describe the environment in which you're operating. And here you may focus on the demographics of the region, whether you're rural, urban, suburban, what types of crime problems there may be, or different things that you're seeing. Perhaps the opioid crisis is hitting your area, unfortunately, very heavily. You might want to note that. Just kind of assume we know nothing about where you're operating, and briefly describe where it is, what your environment is. The 6th form is the statement of the problem with your current situation. So we ask you to, here's where you will download the IDOC commitment table, complete that, and then upload it. But you'll also fill out a question, a narrative question that asks you a little bit about the the target population and individuals that you're planning to work with. Second, let me just check. I've printed out my instructions here. So you'll describe kind of what the program, what sort of diversion programs are currently operating in the area. So if you also work with a task probation, or you have a drug court, but you want to start a mental health court, put that in here. Also talk a little bit about what services are available to meet the needs of the people in the justice system: mental health treatment, substance use disorder treatment, trauma-informed care, housing, anything that you can think of that kind of talks about what's currently available, even if it's not available in sufficient amounts. So this is the, as I mentioned, when you download the IDOC commitment table to complete and upload, this is what we'll be downloading in Excel. And you'll just go to the data that are available on the ARI website and fill this out for your jurisdiction. So for each of the last 3 years, you will just fill out the class 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, and then just indicate who, this is the overall possible eligible population of people who are going to the Department of Corrections on probation eligible charges. Now, not all of these, you may not include all of these in your target population, but we want jurisdictions to kind of get a picture of who is going into the Department of Corrections from your county who could have been diverted. Then the next, number 7, the form, is statement of problem, unmet needs. This is where you focus on. The one right before was, okay, who are we sending to the Department of Corrections on probation eligible charges? And what are the services that are in our community that we could be tapping into? And then this question is where you really focus on what are the unmet needs. And this is going to tee you up for what it is you want to do. So this is where you will talk about the investments that are needed in order to build out a continuum of community-based sanctions and services. So fill out that narrative section and then mark as complete. And once again, a reminder, save often. So even if you don't mark it as complete straight away, do save it. Then when you go back to it, and you want to add to it, all your work has been saved, you can add to it. And then when you feel confident with the way you want it, then you mark it as complete. Okay, so we're over halfway through the 13 forms. Now we're at the 8th form, key partners. We've talked about this a little bit. We want you to download, complete, and upload a key partners table, which is provided. There'll be a link right here that you'll download. I'll show that to you next. And then also that's worth 5 points. And then we also want you to upload your letters of support in one file. And you have room to do that there. But the key partners table that you can download and complete looks like this. It'll come to you in Word. You'll just fill it out, save it, and then upload it. But in this, we just ask for the title, the department, agency, or office. No individual names here, just their title, and then briefly what their role is. And these will expand to accommodate what you want to write. Again, the letters of support, because we want to make sure everybody's on board to have this as a successful program. We ask for letters from chief judge or presiding criminal court judge, state's attorney, public defender, and the director of probation or court services. Put all those together, scan them, or create a PDF with them and upload as one file into Amplifund. Okay, the 9th form is the project implementation. Now, this is the guts of the application. It's comprised of 6 questions and narrative blocks for answers, each worth 5 points each for a total of 30. And those questions go from intake and assessment. So they ask for a brief description of the intake and assessment process. Just a moment. Oh, first, I'm sorry, number 1 is actually describing the target population, 6A. 6B is going to be describing the intake and assessment process. 6C is going to be what will be done different from current practices to supervise and serve this target population. And this is where you would talk a little bit about the evidence-informed practices that you'll be implementing. 6D is how will you integrate or leverage the services that are in the community, such as those described in the statement of need, current situations. So what sort of community-based services for treatment will you be leveraging and working with on this program implementation? Then 6E is a question about how this is going to impact the system at large. So do you expect this to bring down caseload sizes? And if so, what will that mean to the system? Do you expect that you will need to ask your treatment provider to provide a separate drug court or separate treatment groups just for the drug court clients? This is just where you talk about kind of how this fits in like the ecosystem of the criminal legal system in your community once you bring this program online. And then describe a plan to incorporate 6F is 5 points about how do you want to involve the community. So will you have restorative justice practices as part of your program? Will you be using community service for the clients in the program to give back to the community? What are ways that you're going to help them reintegrate? Will there be recovery coaches, AA, NA meetings that you'll access? What does the community look like as a participant or in this program? Okay, so 10 out of 13 is then the logic model. We talked about this. This is just a best practice that we have found really helps sites think through how they're going, how their program works in just a very logical way, and can offer up some ideas of where there may be gaps in their thinking. So we do have a template that we provide, but you can also use your own. The template looks a little like this. It's in a Word and you can just fill it in yourself. But it's what are the inputs? So what is the personnel? This ARI grant? Who are some of the different partners that are going to be there? What sort of activities do you see as outputs? What are the actions that are going to be performed? Substance use disorder, week, substance use disorder treatment, cognitive behavioral therapy groups. What are the different activities that are going to be funded and otherwise in this program? And then how many people are going to be provided this sort of treatment? What's the sort of participation that we'll see here? And then what outcomes, short, medium, and long term, do you expect to see? Then 11 out of 13 is the implementation plan. So we always have an implementation schedule in our grants. What's interesting about Amplifund is that the implementation schedule actually is not going to be an uploaded thing, but it's actually something that you complete directly in Amplifund in the performance plan section, which we'll talk about a little later. But here in this implementation plan section, you just acknowledge that you will be putting an implementation schedule. We know that this is part of what you're doing, and that will be, you acknowledge that you will be completing the performance plan to input your implementation schedule. And then you mark as complete. So that's kind of a two-part thing. You acknowledge that you're going to do the implementation schedule, and then in the performance plan section, you'll actually input it. So the goals and performance metrics section is we're almost at the end of the application forms. This is where your performance metrics will be defined, and we actually provide you with a template for that, which you will download, complete, and upload before you mark as complete in this section. For those sites that we've currently been working with, this will look very familiar. This is the same goals and performance metrics table or set of tables and measures that we've been using over the past several years. So we're using that same template. You define your goal by the numbers, as well as defining who the target population is. You calculate your 25% reduction goal, and then you estimate the number of new enrollments that you will bring in towards that reduction goal. So the number of enrollments should be as many or more than your reduction goal, because that's the way you meet your reduction goal, is by enrolling new people. But the other aspects of it are process objectives and outcome objectives that have to do with how many multidisciplinary team meetings will you hold, how frequently, how many hours of training will you be providing your staff to make sure that they're prepared to work this program. Some of the other ways is how many face-to-face meetings per month. And of course, that may be defined differently in the post-COVID era, but we like to keep track of the frequency of meeting with individuals. And then there are other opportunities that you can add to, including any employment objectives, education objectives, or housing objectives. And then the last application is actually a certification before we get to the budget section. So just read through the prompts and some of the information here as it relates to the budget, and then acknowledge that you have read what the funding restrictions are. So we talk a little bit about how you can utilize the funds. And we'll talk a little bit more about that next. And then we actually have you fill out a cost effectiveness calculation. So I mentioned that earlier, that's your total budget amount divided by the number of people that you expect to serve. And At the end of the day, we expect to see that that number is significantly less than the cost of a year in prison, which is $45,000 per person. And then you acknowledge here that you also will not use these funds to supplant other funds. So here's that cost effectiveness calculation we discussed. It's really pretty straightforward. You'll do it in two ways. One is the cost per person served. So everybody served in the program, and then divided by just the reduction goal or the enrollment goal. So supplanting, again, this is something you have to acknowledge, that these funds will not be used to supplant others. Supplanting is very important with government funds. That just suggests that if you already have funds designated for a purpose, you're not just swapping those with these funds, but these funds actually supplement what you're currently doing. Now, we do have some sites that, for example, already operate a drug court, and they've been utilizing county funds, but those county funds have been insufficient. So ARI funds come in and supplement that and help you expand your drug court. So in that way, you would not be supplanting, you'd be supplementing. And so it's just very important too, that if those county funds that had been used to operate your drug court go away, that they're backfilled with other funds. And our ARI funds can be used to supplement. Okay, just another reminder to save often your work, because after 20 minutes it'll go away if it's not saved. Okay, so the next section, we've completed now the bulk of the application in those 13 forms, and now the budget section is to be completed. And so this is just a very step-by-step process. You just take it a little bit at a time. You'll open up, if you can see at the bottom of here, under the budget instructions are sections for personnel, fringe, travel, equipment, supplies, etc. So on the left-hand side of that is a plus mark. You'll just click on that and you'll open up the line item and complete the line item. So let me show you with supplies. So when you click on supplies, this is the window that opens up. It gives you some ideas of what you would include in the supplies section. You would name it, the cost rate, like if it's, $5 a month, it would be $5, 12 months, and then it will calculate that at $60. And then you write a narrative where you say what's kind of included in that, add a little bit more information on that. How is it necessary for the program in just a sentence or two? How it's going to benefit the program, and then what the cost is based on, whether that's based on a bid, a request for proposal, or that you've checked 3 different areas and that this is the most reasonable cost for that. So again, and in the budget and budget narrative, you'll go through each of those sections. And some different things to consider is among these, I mentioned supplies, but there's also indirect costs that you can request. There's a full description of that in the NOFO instructions. Go over the allowable expenses and what's unallowable and prohibited. And then again, we talked about supplanting. So I did want to talk a little bit about the allowable expenses. These have actually been expanded, but the ways different sites utilize ARI funds are to bring on personnel like probation officers, specially trained probation officers with a smaller caseload, for example, on a problem-solving court team, training for those individuals on the best practices, travel to conferences or travel within a service area to meet the needs of the clients, program supplies and equipment. So one thing that's new this year is that now an allowable expense can be vehicles. We have a vehicle policy about that, but that is something to consider. It's just something that we've heard transportation as a concern with so many of our grantees, that vehicles had been prohibited, but now they are allowable expense under certain conditions. Behavioral health services, mental health treatment, substance use disorder treatment. There may be transportation assistance with bus passes, Uber cards. Housing assistance is something that's become very big with our grantees. First month's rent, transitional housing. Incentives to meet that positive reinforcement, for positive reinforcement for every negative reinforcement to really get successful behavior change. So that could be, again, a gas card, a gift card. Some people give out, calendars to help people keep track of all their appointments while they're under supervision. You can also use funds outside of client services for the needs of your program to collect the data and analyze the data. We've talked about that as being performance measurement data as being very important to our program. And then also you may want to consider contracting with somebody, a local university, to do your own evaluation of your program. We get opportunities overall with our program, but maybe your individual program would want to work with a local researcher on an evaluation. So those are just some ideas, and this is not exhaustive, but just some ways that you can utilize our funds. Now, some prohibited uses are land acquisition and new construction. These are pretty obvious and have been prohibited uses for as long as we've been doing this program. No major renovations on the building. Capital expenditures, fundraising activities, or lobbying expenses. Okay, so I saw there was a question about the budget. Can you, Stacy or Caitlin?
Yes, there was one question about the budget from Shannon.
I lost you,
Answer
Stacy.
all.
Okay. I'm sorry, Stacy, you're cutting. Actually, go ahead, Sharon.
What I have had some experience with the GMS system with federal grants, and one of the problems with their system, though, you cannot print a detail of your budget. So I'm just wondering, at Amplify, can you do that once you enter all your data?
You mean, can you print out the budget after you've input all your data and just have like a picture of your budget or a
Yes, in
printout?
detail. Mm-hmm.
I'll have to find that out. We don't have our Amplifund expert here, Adriana, but I will find that out. We'll let you know.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure. And we'll have the answer in the questions and answers that are posted. Okay, so we're actually now at the last step before submission, at least in Amplifund. And that is the performance plan, which is the way that you will input your implementation schedule. And in here, you'll use the edit or pencil tool to add each step. So many of you who have been working with us will have an implementation schedule that says what you want to complete, by when, and who's going to do it. And these are just, each individual step is added using this add goal function. We have some ideas in here already that are just kind of holding down space, so you can edit those out or use those and then edit them to your liking, or just add the goals. But the two different types of implementation steps are, one is a milestone, which has a due date. So that is like, we want to hire a coordinator for the program. maybe describe what it is if further description is needed, and we want to have that person hired by October 1st. And that puts it on the implementation schedule that we can use and you can use to make sure you're staying on track. The other kind is just a narrative goal type. So one's milestone, one's narrative. And this one may be more like a frequency goal on your implementation schedule, I should say a frequency step. So we're going to hold multidisciplinary steering club or steering committee meetings quarterly. So you would have that here, and then in the narrative, you would put the frequency. So that's where there wouldn't be just like one due date that you have to hit, but just generally how you know you're going to keep on track, like hold cognitive behavioral therapy groups weekly. Okay. So that once you've completed all these things, and again, save often. But then when it's where you want it to be, mark it as complete. And then once they've all been marked as complete, you'll hit the submit button. You will not receive this success thing unless everything has been marked as complete. So it will tell you if you're not ready to submit it, and it will tell you if you need to go back and look at something. It'll be in red, and it'll say this section's not complete. But this is what you want to see, which is a successful submission. And before it actually submits it, it will ask you, are you sure? But then that is when you'll have everything in Amplifund. So just a reminder as you're going through it to be aware of the evaluation and scoring. Because at the end of the day, once we receive it, this is what our individual scorers are going to look at. So the due date, again, is 5 p.m. on April 27th, 2023, and all the required application materials must be submitted via Amplifund by that time. Proposals will not be accepted by mail, fax, or email, or in person. And incomplete applications will not be reviewed. Now, here's something that's, I guess, interesting and great about Amplifund. You can't submit pretty much an incomplete application. I mean, there are going to be a lot of, checks along the way to make sure that you will have a complete application. So that is something that's a little bit of a safeguard in Amplifund that you can hopefully rely on. Late submissions will not be reviewed. Now, Sharon mentioned this, for those of you who have experience with, say, federal grants and federal grants management systems or other grant management systems, as you know, there can always be something that will go wrong with technology. So applicants are encouraged to submit the application in advance so that if there are any issues, they can be worked out prior to the due date and time. And another thing to note is that we used to have this, the time that it was due at 1 minute before midnight, but that was changed to 5 p.m. And that is so that we will be on hand. There will be staff on hand up until the time it's due to help troubleshoot with you. Okay. That wasn't the case if it was in the middle of the night. So that's why 5 p.m. is now the time at which it's due. Now, the review process is once everything's been submitted, we will screen the applications and make sure that we have everything that we need. Everything that's in Amplifund then goes to an expert panel to review and score it. We use internal CJIS staff and external experts to review. There are at least 3 reviewers for every application. And that is so that we get really a broad view of how this application is going to score. Those scores are then compiled and provided to our site selection and monitoring committee, which reviews all the materials and develops funding recommendations that will go to the full board. That's like if there are any questions, anything that we need to learn more about from the applicants, we can collect this information and have it in the funding recommendation. Then that will go to our oversight board for review and approval. Any questions on the review process before I talk a little bit about resources and then we go to questions and answers?
No, I'm not seeing anything on the review process, but we did get a question from Kelly Gallivan Ilaraza about the letters of recommendation. So the question is, for letters of support for Cook County problem solving courts, do you want the team member or the actual public defender or the state's attorney?
That's a good question. I think ideally we would like the chief public defender, the chief state's attorney, to be, providing their blessing for the program. If that's difficult to do, or if someone can speak on behalf of the office, that would be fine too. But I think ideally it would be signed by the chief of those departments. Okay, I'm going to move on to some resources. We've talked about these, but if you go to the Adult Redeploy Illinois website at the grants tab, that's where you will find the application information and the eligibility tables of which we spoke. But over and above that, there's other information at the apps tab. It kind of links to some other data sets, maybe some arrest data sets, some different things if you want to go into further detail around substance use or mental health. We also have a resources tab at our website that includes toolkits, webinars that we've done as part of our learning community over the years. The CJA website at cja.illinois.gov has a whole research section, but probably most pertinent to this is access to the GATA page and a number of webinars. There's applicant technical assistance recording, a number of recordings that are available at the CJA YouTube channel. In particular, and these are mentioned in the NOFO instructions, there are webinars about registering in the GATA grantee portal, in Amplifund, how to complete the application in Amplifund over and above what we've talked about, and even just a whole general grant writing and management instruction course that you can take. So I think one of the greatest resources that you have is us, the team, that will take your questions up through 5 o'clock on April 20th at this email address, cja.adultredeploynofo@illinois.gov. Just submit your questions. They will be answered. And then the questions and the responses will be posted at the CJA website and in Amplifund so that everybody can benefit from them. Also, questions can be directed to the contact for our NOFO manager, if you will, who's Stacy, who's been on this call with us today. And she can be specifically contacted through the same cja.adultredeploynofo@illinois.gov email. Anything related to this NOFO needs to go through this email address. That's so that you have we all have access to that. We can all look at it. You have a hive of people answering it. And questions cannot be directed to individual staff because this is a competitive funding opportunity, and individually we cannot answer questions that might give a competitive advantage to individual applicants. But if you go through this email address, you will get your questions answered. So again, this is the reminder. Everything is due in Amplifund by 5 p.m. on April 27th. This is your checklist. In Amplifund, you'll need to have the grant application, all elements of the program narrative, which were 6 questions answered. Additional documentation is the commitment table for IDOC numbers, key partners table, your letters of support, logic model, and performance metrics table. The budget and budget narrative must be completed in Amplifund, and your performance implementation plan in Amplifund. So we did have a couple of questions I thought I'd just raise for the group. These have been posted, but I thought that they were good to go over just quickly. This question is the implementation grant the one for those who already have a program and have had an ARI grant in the past, or is it just for those who want to create a new program? The answer is both. Everybody needs to apply through this notice of funding opportunity if you want access to Adult Redeploy Illinois funds. So whether you are a current site that is looking for ongoing funding, or you're a brand new site, you must complete this application in Amplifund. Okay. I'm not able to get to the Amplifund website. It tells me that an error occurred. The user may be disabled. Contact your administrator. Can you help me? We've gotten this question already a couple of times. The answer is just make sure that you go and register register for access in Amplifund, and that each person who needs to be working in Amplifund has to be given access to it. If you're still getting those error messages, even after you've checked the boxes and made sure you have access or your administrator has, then you either need to contact the person who put you in there, whether if it's somebody else at your site or in your county, or you can go to the Amplifund Zendex and they have a submit a request, and they have operators on duty that can take that request and they will answer it. The point that's important here is that CJA is not the administrator to contact, and we're really not the ones who can troubleshoot. Those answers are best given by Amplifund themselves, and they have this help desk or Zendex desk set up that you register for, and they're really good at responding to your questions, and they know it from the inside out. The last question I just wanted to highlight was, I was wondering if this implementation NOFO is open to addiction recovery centers. And it's just important here to note that the eligible applicants are county units of government or judicial circuits, as we mentioned. If you're a not-for-profit or a unit of local government, as we heard, like a local police department, city police department, you cannot apply yourself, but you can work with the applicant jurisdiction and get a subaward or subcontract through a grant, but that grant does have to flow through the county unit of government. Now, if as a not-for-profit, you're wondering if your county is already engaged in the Adult Redeploy program, you can go to the ARI website at the Programs tab and click on the map. And most of those have our sites, actually, they have descriptions of how that funding is currently being used in the county as of this year. and a contact person. So for example, if you're an addiction recovery center working in Boone County and you want to see if you can, be part of this mission and draw down some of these funds, you could contact our program contact in Boone County, and they can let you know how you might become a subcontract to their ARI grant. Okay. So are there any other questions that remain to be answered?
We do have one more question in the chat from Shannon Bendarik, and that question is regarding the 25% reduction requirement and the cost per person. If a site has a specialty court with several pathways, such as drug court, mental health court, and veterans court, is the site limited to the 25% reduction number and the cost per person request for funding? Or can a site commit to a 30% reduction number and use that number to compute the request?
You, if I understand that correctly, and by the way, all these questions we will also answer and post, and might be able to actually come up with more articulate answers, but you never restricted. I mean, our goal is to reduce the number of people going into prison who don't need to be going into prison. And so whether that 25% is just what was established in our legislation, because that was determined to be doable by most sites. I think it's very difficult to eliminate the number of people that you are sending to the Department of Corrections and get them all in the community, but 25% seemed to be a reasonable place to start to make a significant difference in how a county is utilizing the prison system. So 30%, I'm sure this is what I would suggest though. I think you can place your goals wherever you want them to be, but as far as your contract goal, you should have your 25%, you should use the 25% reduction goal. And then if you can exceed that, if you can, do a 30% or more than that, do it. But as far as like your contractual obligation, you should probably hold it to the minimal required, if that makes sense. We strongly encourage jurisdictions to, do better than that. But, we go with the minimal and then do better. Any other questions? Again, I hope this process goes well for folks. I know it's new, but if we just take it step by step, believe it is very doable, and there are benefits to this process that will become more obvious, I think, as we go along. There will be efficiencies through the use of this grants management system that folks will benefit from, but we need to, establish our program within it, and we'll just take it step by step. But please ask questions via that email address. Let me put it back up here again. We will answer those questions as soon as we can, and well, best wishes for a successful application process. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of the week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.